Sorry, I'm just checking something here quickly. Right, so just before we start, something that's quite important is try to make sure that you've got an instance of a browser open, either Google Chrome or any modern browser will work, because the session is going to be quite practical. But before we can dive into that, we're going to start off with just a little bit of theoretical underpinnings of what we do exactly. Right, so first and foremost, my name is Jaco van Niekerk. I'm the e-learning advisor in the Cape Winelands district. So there's my contact details, as well as the Cape Winelands e-learning site that we maintain. I've been the e-learning advisor for a couple of years now, and really the things that we're going to be showing you today are things that that we can't live without, but we're really trying to look at how you can practically implement some of these systems in your own environment. So just a couple of basic house rules. Your cameras and your microphones have been set to mute and have been turned off by default. This just allows us to move through the whole training a little bit more, a bit smoother. And then secondly, please make use of the chat. So George and Anita from e-learning head office are both in the session as well. They'll be monitoring the chat for us, and they'll respond accordingly in the chat. I will also try and keep an eye on the chat and see if there's any specific questions that need to be addressed. So use please use the chat functionality if you've got questions. One other thing, please make use of your reaction icons, the thumbs up and the heart and the applause and the laugh and all those things during the session. You're more than welcome to ask questions in the chat. Before you raise your hand, just ask the question, and Anita is going to respond to that. Alternatively, I will respond to that in the live session specifically. Right, so what we're looking at today, and specifically just to give a little background on this whole thing, is we're looking at this concept of digital reporting, data visualization, with essentially the goal in mind to bring about systemic change. Because data is an incredibly powerful thing. The more we have, the more likely it is that we are able to make data-driven decisions. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that are involved with it, being able to interpret and understand the data. That's a big part of what we need to do. But really, before we can begin with any of that, we need to understand how do we get it, and how do we just get the data that we can start trying to make decisions based on those things. So all of this is about bringing about systemic change, because if we can become more transparent in what we're doing, we're really able to get to a point where we can support our learners better than we are doing at the moment. So this is something we're really going to focus on specifically on Friday's session, but it's such an important thing that I felt we're going to discuss it in both today's session and in Friday's session. And that's something that I'm sure if you've ever used Google Forms to collect information, you're likely to have run into this issue at some point. So here are just two example questions that I've asked. The first question is the full name of the candidate. And the problem is what you see in front of you here, and this is just to open your thoughts up about what we talk about when we talk about data, really, is what actually happens here. With the way that I've entered the information, I've created 5 different entries. So while all of this is the same, Jaco van Niekerk, any system that needs to deal with this in terms of information is going to see this as 5 different people and not one person. So in today's session, we're not going to actually look at how do we solve that. In today's session, we are just going to focus on in today's session, we're first going to just focus on how do we get the information. In Friday's session, we're going to try and figure out how do we control the information that we're getting a little bit better. And this is another example that often happens when we say enter a school's name. Now, the example that I've used here, Eastland Park Secondary, is one of the bigger high schools in our district. And we've often been in this position where people ask or we create a Google form where they're supposed to type out these things. And the minute they do that, we end up getting so many different examples. Eston Park, I use this as a specific example because theirs just seems to generate so many different options how people write it. And in this instance, they're actually all, the Eston Park part is actually spelled correctly, which is often not the case. Very often they'll have only one S or two L's or whatever the case might be. So we need to start being aware of things like that. How do we being aware of what data actually means and how do we control that? Right, but we're not looking at that today yet. Today, we're just going to start with the kind of basic part of where we want to eventually get to. We want to get to the point where we can make data-driven decisions. That's ultimately the goal when we talk about systemic change. The systemic change that we're referring to is the systemic change that can be brought about by making data-driven decisions, right? And before we can get to that, we have to ask ourselves a very simple question. What is the data we actually need? So if we don't have data, we can't make decisions. And then how do we actually go about taking this raw data and turning it into meaningful data? Because if you're just going to have a bunch of data and you're going to look at an endlessly long spreadsheet of just things, you can't really make much sense of that. So in today's session, we're really going to focus first on understanding the relation between two very useful tools that are both entirely free in order to get to where we want to get to. So the first one we want to look at is how do we do data capture? And we're going to use Google Forms to do that data capture. And the second one we want to look at is how do we actually then process that data? I see there's a couple of people who have their hands raised. Please, can you just, if you've got a question, just first enter your question in the chat. I just want to double check, are other people seeing the presentation?
Jaco, I can see the presentation, but it seems like some of the people are having a challenge. I'm not sure whether that is maybe because they are in the browser. We've noticed that Microsoft has been giving us some challenges this week. Maybe they're updating some systems. So depending on where you link to the session, sometimes there's some challenges. So rather just go out, come in again.
Right, and it's very possible that it has to do with the way that this presentation is shown now, but don't worry, we're going to get into the practical side of things soon, so then we'll share in a different way that will hopefully work there. But okay. I'll get to the theoretical stuff quickly so we can dive into the practical side of things. All right, so essentially what we're doing is what we want to do today is we want to look at how do we do some data capturing using Google Forms, and then what happens with the data that when it gets pulled into Google Sheets, so we can try and understand this integration between the two, to really understand how the two of them work together. Right, this is not the track 1 for beginners, this is the masterclass. So what we're going to be doing today is some a little bit more tricky things. Right, so we're going to start off with Google Forms, and I want to just say that with this session, we are not looking at how to make a Google form. We're really I'm going to give you a Google form that has been created before, and we're going to manipulate it a little bit, but we're not looking at how do you actually create a Google form in this session. There are other videos that we've made in the past, other sessions, and I suppose there'll be future sessions, so you're welcome to contact your e-learning team to ask where they can get some more information on that, but we're not going to look at that part of things. This is a masterclass, so we are going to be going from a certain expected knowledge level already. So firstly, we're going to see how do we take the form responses that we get on a Google form and put it into a Google Sheet. Then we're going to see what happens if I actually go and change my form after I've already linked it to a sheet. How does it influence the sheet, and what can I do and what can't I do? And then we're going to look at exporting multiple forms to one sheet, because that's a very useful thing to do if you've got a lot of different Google Forms collecting information and having all of that go into one central sheet. Right, then, so the Google Forms part is not going to be a big part of our session. Then we're going to go to Google Sheets. So we want to understand how the form actually writes its information into a Google Sheet. The second thing we want to understand is how do we actually process data dynamically with forms? How do we process the data in Sheets using dynamic formulas? Now, this is the part that can get a little bit tricky, but we're trying to make it easier for you. By giving you a cheat sheet. We'll get to that now. And then we want to look at how do we actually combine data. So that's just a quick overview of what we want to do. This is a practical session, as I said in the beginning of the session. So you please make sure that you've got another window or another tab open. I hope that you are able to switch between these two different tabs, switch between your different windows, because that's something you're going to need to be able to do. You will need to be logged into a Google account. And remember, we are making recordings of this. We've also got shorter videos that we'll share with you. These things are only shared at the end of the whole series, so not next week, the week after that. So you will be able to review those things if you get stuck, if you fall behind. And again, please make use of the chat if you've got questions so that we can try and answer those questions. Right, so let's get to the practical side of things. Now, you'll see there are two links. I'm going to copy these links into the chat now as well. They should be clickable. The first link, if you click on that, it's going to give you a prompt that says make a copy of a document, the discipline form for grade X. And the second one, if you click on that, don't look at that one too much now, because then you might get a little bit frightened. That's when we look at the formulas that we want to use in our session. But we'll explain that in due course. Right, so first click on the first link to create the copy of your form template. I'm going to leave that open there for a few more seconds so that you can actually copy that. If that doesn't work, you can refer to the chat. I've pasted both links there in the chat as well. The first one being the link to the first one is the link to the form, and the second one is the link to the cheat sheet. So you can open up those so long. Right, if you've got yours open, if you've made your copy, just give me a thumbs up, an indication that you've created a copy of the Google form.
Jaco, I think we can also maybe, while they open up that sheets, ask quickly if you have the time, quickly type for us, have you ever worked with Google Sheets? Let's say, yes, I'm a pro is a 3. I've worked on it is a 2. I've never worked on it is a 1. Let's quickly see what is our baseline. 3, yes, I'm good with it. I'm comfortable. 2, I have worked on it, but not that comfortable. 1, I've never worked on it. Let's see. Okay, we're getting greens, we're getting 1s and 2s, lots of 2s, a few 3s. Absolutely beginner. Okay, Turner, I saw that that you joined. Don't run away, but this might frighten you a bit, so don't be overwhelmed. You are actually yeah, joining the fast cars at the moment, but but yeah, stick around, see what's possible. Even if you don't, if you lose us a bit, don't stress about it, because this is going to be a bit fast for those that is not yet so familiar with the platforms. But at least you will get access to resources, and this facilitated session will be yeah, it will showcase to you exactly what is possible in the resource packs that you will get.
Right, thanks, Anita. So just to show what you've got in front of you now, you should have made a copy of this Google form, which is just a generic form. You can change something that we often forget to change. You can just change this X to 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever you want to change it to. that could be appropriate, because the system, well, what we want to look at today is just how I can create a little Google form that can start collecting information on a disciplinary record from my learners. So what we'll do today and next week is we're going to start with the building blocks of something that could actually be practically used in a school environment, tracking disciplinary records of learners, etc. So just simply change that X to a 1, and let's just have a look at what we've got in our Google form. Don't add anything now. We'll slowly but surely, we're going to start manipulating this original form to get to the point where we want it. Right. So first, I've got my form. I've got my first question: learner name, learner surname. Now, if you paid attention to some of the things we spoke about earlier, this is already a problem, but it's not a problem we're going to address now. We've got learner's name, we've got learner surname, we've got class, and then we've got 2 more questions. One is where they select one of these options. Was the learner late? Is it an academic offense or a behavior offense? And then just a description that of what's actually happened. So we're trying to build a very short form. I think that's one of the key things that I like to try and do when I design any kind of these systems where I'm collecting information is kind of get a bang for your buck. So in other words, don't have a ton of questions sometimes, but it depends. There are certain occasions where we need a lot of different little bits of information in order to build our system. Those of you who registered for these sessions now, you'll notice there's quite a lot of different sections to the in-session registration that you do on your Google form. But just to give you an idea, that gets plugged into a system that allows us to track the activity and attendance across the entire province of the teachers who are attending our e-learning sessions. And that's been really useful for us to see where lots of teachers are participating, who are the ones that are participating in a lot of sessions, etc., etc. Right, so once we've got this, now we want to look at how do we link this form to a Google Sheet. So doing that is quite simple. Once you've got it open in editing mode, you're just going to click on responses. And those of you who used Google Forms, very often this is where we'll just check what people are saying in our form. But we want to now move it over to a Google Sheet. So this little green icon over there allows us to create a Google Sheet where the information is automatically linked. Now, I'm just going to rename this one. So once I've opened up there, you can change the name to whatever you want. I'm just going to change it to, I'm going to give it this name because this allows me to make sure what it is that I'm using so that I can go and clean up my Google Drive at a later stage. And just something that's interesting about how it does it in terms of its file location, the Google Sheet will be created in the same folder that your original Google form was in your drive. So just a tip, try and keep your drive as neat and tidy as possible. I know this is not always, this sometimes can become quite difficult. Mine has become a little bit messier in recent times, but I try my very best to keep things nice and tidy. So there I've got my Google Sheet, and this is linked to my Google form. Now you'll see every column is essentially the header at the top is just the name, or is literally the question that I've asked. So if I'm asking a long question, I'm going to end up having a long audio. I'm reading the message in the chat. If I've got a long question, I'm going to end up having a long header, column header. And even if you change that column header, it's just going to change back to what your Google form was. So just keep that in mind when you're asking your questions. It's not a problem. You just kind of need to understand what is going on, what these questions are. There are different ways of getting around that as well. So what happens now when I realize I forgot one very important question, and that is I probably need to track who the teacher is that is submitting this offense now. So now I want to actually add a question to my Google form. Let's see what happens once I do that. So I'm going to go back to my Google form. I'm going to go back to my questions, and I want to add a new question. So once you've linked your Google form to a sheet, it's not like you can't add things to it. It's not like that it's done now, but we want to add a question here. in between are between learner name, learner surname, and class. We're just going to add a question. We're just going to add a question there, and we're going to say, please tell me the teacher's name as well. So we'll add question. We're going to say teacher, and Google Forms will automatically detect that it's a short answer because I haven't specified anything else. Right, so once I've got that set up, let's see what actually happens to my sheet. So we'll click on the sheet, and you'll see the column has been added to the end of the sheet. Now, that's basically what will happen with any kind of thing that you're going to add. The column will always be added to the end. So any question I add, irrespective of where I actually add it in my form, will be added to the end of my Google Sheet. Right, so what we want to do now, and that's one of the nice things that people don't always realize you can do, is I can actually go and I can move this column. So I can click on this column and I'll move it. I want to actually put it just so that it looks the same as our example that we want to build towards. We're going to put the teacher name is going to be between class and offense. So something that's also quite interesting about that, if I look at my Google form, I've actually put the teacher now between learner surname and class. It really doesn't matter where you put it. I can move it anywhere where I want to in my Google form. The response to this question, teacher, will write to that column, and I can move it around anywhere in the Google Sheet that I want. So this is a very useful thing to know if you end up creating a Google form, you start using it and you realize, oh, but I want to add some questions. How can I actually add these questions to my form, and how can it change? I see Surelda's asking for the link to the form. I don't know why I've suddenly lost chat privileges in the message. So if we can just, okay, thanks, Harriet. I see Harriet has shared it now. Right, so just to take note of that, something else I want to point out that you need to understand with how Google Sheets or Forms writes to a Google form writes to a Google Sheet is it doesn't actually write information into a row. Now, what I mean by that, I want to show you what happens here. I'm going to highlight row 1 in pink, bright pink, so everyone can see what's going on there. Now I want to enter some info. I'm going to complete a form entry. Just to show you how you complete form entries, if I'm on my Google form, if I go right to the top, I can use this little eye icon that allows me to preview preview my form and to punch in some information. Because once you set up a Google form, it's often a good idea to just enter some information to see what's going to happen. Right, so I'm going to go to the preview option here, and it shows me exactly what my Google form will look like. Yours won't have these little purple circles, except if you've got Moat installed, so you can just ignore that. Now I'm just going to enter the first learner that has some transgression, Jaco van Niekerk. The teacher is also Mr. van Niekerk, and he's in class A. We're going to say next. We get to this question, academic, and did not do his homework. Now, before I submit, I want you to again have a look at my Google Sheet. Here I've got my Google Sheet. I've got my purple or my pink row there. So what we normally think is going to happen is this is now going to write information into row 2, because row 2 is my first row that I want to add information to. But that's not what actually happens. We're going to say submit, and you'll see it's moved down. Now this is how Google Forms writes information into Google Sheets. And this is quite an important thing to realize, especially when we come to formulas. And you'll understand why in a minute when we start with our first formulas. So what's happened here is it did not insert information into the row. What it actually does, it literally goes and it inserts a new row and then writes the information to that row. So it's not going to write anything into a row, meaning it can't overwrite information on the one hand, which is great, and it also can't run out of lines or rows to write information, because it just creates new rows every time that it needs to write something. That's the why it has been designed to do that. And it's an important thing to be aware of. Now, something else that's also very useful to know is you can add columns, just like we were able to move this teacher column, because when we created the new information, it ended up at the end, but we don't want the teacher column to be the final column. I want it to move over here next to the class column. It's just easier for me to keep my information nice and organized together. So what's also useful to know is I can insert columns, blank columns in between, where I can then write formulas and do various things with the data based on that. So, for example, I want to add a row formula. All right, so I'm going to go insert left, and then I've added my row formula. Okay, so just want to close that one quickly. So with this row formula that I've, or this row column that I've added, I could now go and say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. But we know what's going to happen is the minute that I have a new entry, it's actually going to go do this, and it's not going to write it's not going to write the information next to 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I need to figure out a different way to do that, and we do that by using formulas. Now, I'm first going to explain the formula, and then we're just going to go to the cheat sheet. Maybe we should go to the cheat sheet first. So I hope you've opened up the cheat sheet as well, and that you can still see the cheat sheet. Yeah, I'm opening it up on my end. So this is our cheat sheet. Now we're going to get back to number 1 in a second. We're going to actually go to number 2, and we're going to look at how do we add this row formula. So that's the actual formula that you see in front of you, and it looks very intimidating when you see it the first time. But I'm going to add it, and I'm going to explain bit by bit what we are doing and why we are doing what we are doing. And then you can copy and paste it, and hopefully you'll understand what it is that you've copied and pasted. So the first part of our formula that we're going to be using is just a very simple formula that is called equals row. Now, what row does, what this little formula does, and I hope you're all familiar with. Let me just zoom in a little bit, because now you can see clearly, I'm hoping. So the row formula, all that the row formula does is it tells me the row number that I'm in. So if I'm going to apply this little row thing to row 2, and I want to do automatic numbers, I know that I just need to minus 1. And there I've got my formula. Now, if you've ever used Excel or any other similar kind of tool, you'll know the easiest thing to do next is just click on that little block in the corner and just drag it down. And guess what? It is going to work. It will generate the row numbers accurately. The problem is, again, what's going to happen? Google Forms will go and it will insert a row, and it's not going to copy my formula. So you'll have to do that every single time a new value is added, which is not going to work for us. We want to figure out how we can do it a little bit better. But we also don't want the rows just to be written by default when it's blank. So then we're going to use this little extra tail to it called the if formula. The if formula is quite a simple formula as well. I like to write my ones in different rows just to explain what's happening. So we're going to take if, and we're going to use the if formula. So what's quite useful is if you press this little question mark, it tells you exactly what it is that you're doing. So we want to create this if formula, and what this if formula does is first we're going to use what they call a logical expression. So in other words, it tests something. Here they say if cell A2 equals that, then it's true. Then I tell it what's the value going to be if it's true, and what's the value going to be if it's false. So I'm going to say if B2, right? So I'm testing this column is not blank. So in other words, that is the expression for that. It's a bit of a weird one, but that's what it is. It's a less than and greater than, and essentially if it does not equal that. So if it does not equal that, in other words, if there is something there, then we're going to say run that little formula. Okay, so there it is. There we running the row function. But if it is blank, so that's the value if it's true, and the value if it's false is we don't want anything to display. And I'm going to close that, and you'll see now if I drag it down, it's going to look like there's nothing happening, but the minute I write something there, it'll pick up and it'll add the row number. The problem is this is not really solved our problem, because I still had to drag the formula down. And now we're going to get to the more to one of the parts that gets a little bit complicated. Sorry, just want to take that away. And that is the next formula that we want to use. It's called the array formula. Now, just a word of warning. Some people, this is usually the point where people are really scratching their heads and get very confused as to what's going on. We go through this slowly because the array formula is such an essential part of being able to do a lot of these things. And it is a little bit tricky when you do it, but we're going through it slowly, and we're going to do lots of examples of it that hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have a good understanding of how it works. And then we recap it again on Friday, just so that you really have the best chance of wrapping your head around it. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap that whole formula. Let's just put that on one row so everyone can see what's happening there. I've got my logical expression. Can you see that it highlights it for me? I'm checking if B2 is not blank, then we're going to run that formula. But if it is blank, we're just going to insert again blank, nothing. So the quotation marks are just the testing, the kind of the text that might be in there. So we're going to add essentially a blank space. That's what we want to add. Now, the array formula, I'm going to just add this whole thing in an array formula. Open up my bracket and close my bracket. Sorry, I've gone for the completely the wrong thing. Right, open up my bracket and close my bracket. Right. So technically, nothing is going to happen now. So it's not going to look like anything has happened now. I've changed my formula over here. I just want to delete this quickly because otherwise it's going to. Right. So what the array formula does, just to explain essentially the function of it, it applies that formula over multiple rows. But because I've only selected B2, it's not actually going to apply this formula on multiple rows. It's only going to do it once. It's only going to try and determine the row number once. But if I give it a range to work with, and I say B2 to B, what that means is every single cell, so in B2, in B3, in B4, in B5, in B6, in B7, in B8, every single cell, it's going to try and run this formula. So it's going to check, is there anything in column B? And if there's something in column B, generate an automatic row number. Otherwise, don't give me anything. So let's just say enter and see what happens. Okay. I'm glad it does that because I want to show you what that means. What's actually happened now is this formula that I have basically goes and reserves this whole space. It's trying to write information into column A. Now, if you get a reference error, what that means is there's something in the way. It's trying to write information, but it's not managing to write the information because something has been put in there. Now, you'll remember, we actually copied this formula all the way down to row 10. So it's seeing the formula and it says, but I can't write anything because there's a formula in the way. So let's just quickly take that away and you'll see, there we go, it's generating. Now I can scroll all the way down to row 84 and I can type something and, sorry, I forgot something very important. The reason why it gave me that 1 is it's not actually running the row formula in the correct thing. So I need to specify a range for that as well, B2 to B. So now it's going to run it in the correct one. And now if we go down, you'll see it is generating the correct number. It's supposed to be 83 because remember row 1 is our column headers. So this would be item 83 technically. Now, and you'll also see I can't delete that because it's being generated by a formula. It doesn't go anywhere. The only way to get rid of that is to actually go and delete the other column that is generating that. Right. So now I've got my array formula set up to run on this whole thing. But now there's something else. And if we go to our cheat sheet, you'll notice there's something else happening in this cheat sheet that I didn't talk about now, because there's extra stuff here that I did not use that I'm supposed to use. So let's just go to the formula breakdown to try and understand what exactly it is that I'm still missing here and why we want to use it and how it helps. And then I'm going to, after that, while I'm explaining this, I hope you've already tried to copy and paste the formula into your sheet. And I'll get to that in a second, because some of you might have experienced some issues when you copy and paste it, because there's a way that you need to do it if you're not doing it correctly. Right. So let's go to the formula breakdown and I'll explain to you how that works. Now, this one is technically not correct because it's supposed to be not supposed to check row A, it's supposed, or column A, it's supposed to check column B. But right, let me just quickly explain. We talked about what the row one does, and we talked about what the if function does. There's a logic test, the one in green, the value that displays if it's true and the value that displays if it's false. Just on that note, the if function is probably one of the, if not the most important one that you need to wrap your head around when you're starting to kind of do these things. How does the if work? If this is true, then do that. If it's false, then do that. Very, very powerful thing to be able to use. We looked at what the array formula does. It means that I can actually run a formula on multiple rows. It's also quite useful because if there's something that you need to change, you don't need to change it in the whole column. You can just change it in one place, and it automatically affects all the rows beneath it. Now, what is this last part that I've brought in? And this part can sometimes be a little bit confusing, but I'll just explain it very, very briefly because we're going to use it in a different way a bit later. But what it does is it actually creates a header for me. Now, the reason why that is useful is I've seen this more than once, that the first row that you enter in a Google form, as I did now, is usually just dummy information just to test if everything works. Then by the time your system starts running, you want to remove that first value. But the problem is now you go to this value, and if I delete this row, I delete all my array formulas along with it. My formulas that are supposed to run down the whole thing, they go away. So this is why it's a useful tip. It's not essential. You don't have to do this, but it is useful to do this, because what this means is I can now paste this formula in the top, in row 1. I can paste it alongside all my other column headers that are automatically generated by my Google form, which means no one will be able to take, or not no one, but it means that I'm not going to delete my formulas. I know that I go to row 1, and that's where I edit where I can go and edit my formulas. So let's see how I can copy that. I'll just go select there. I copy it. Right click and copy. Then you go to your Google Sheet. Now, an important thing is if you're going to paste it, because sometimes it does something funny, sometimes it works perfectly fine. Click in A1, and then you click in the formula box, and you paste it in the formula box. Paste it, enter, and there it goes. Now you see it's automatically generating that as my column header. Right, and I can change that column header easily. So there I have my very first array formula set up for this Google form, or for this Google sheet. Now, that's all well and good, but a row numbering thing is not always going to be so useful. But mind you, when you set up forms, this is quite useful to be able to do that. Please note, if some of you are having issues, because I know some people had issues with that, if it's generating something that looks like the timestamp, the date, just make sure that you click here on more formats and change it to automatic, because it might be because you inserted a column before the timestamp one. It by default gives it the date format. So just go there and change it to something to number, for example, and then it'll give you that, and you can just take the take your decimals away. Right, now I've got some information in here. I'm going to give you a few minutes to try and just make sure you've got that one ready. Sorted. Give me a thumbs up or whatever in the on Teams to show me that you're still keeping up. And if you've got that inserted, I want you to try and add one or two. I see that there are people with hands up. If you've got questions, please just type the question in the chat. I hope you've got access to the chat. I know there's people that are struggling with that as well.
Yeah, but just on that note, I was also just thrown out of the chat, so I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to try and connect to the browser and see if I can access the chat.
I see. I've also not got access to the chat. I'm also not sure what's going on. So I can't reply to your, if you can ask a question, I can reply to it, can tell you the answer, but I can't type the answer. Right. So once you've got that auto numbering sorted, try and enter a couple of values, add some more information so you've got more than one row to work with. I'm just going to do that as well. I'm just going to open up my form. I'll show you now how information is being written to it live. So I've got my form open somewhere else. You won't be able to see it, but it's going to start capturing information in a second. I just need to capture some information. Right, so now I'm going to submit, and you'll see immediately as I submit, there's the information. Now, this is one of the things that's incredibly useful about using Google, the Google Forms and Google Sheets combination, is the fact that there's no downloading of the information that you have to do. All of it is linked to online cloud-based things that keeps on being updated. So you can send this out, or registration forms, just to give you an idea, they run all the way past 12,000 by now. We're not sure when we're going to run into. We've got theoretical ideas of when we're going to run into issues, but if you keep your forms nice and short, fewer columns, then you're going to be able to run into thousands upon thousands of responses. So you're building a little mini database here. That's what you're essentially doing. Let me just punch in one more, so we've got a little bit more information to work with. Right, we're just punching in one more entry. Right, so now that we've got this, you can see I've got 3 entries that have been punched in here. But it's not very often where we have things like this. We generally want to create an extra column where we can combine different columns. So again, we're going to do the same thing that we did here. We're going to use a similar type of thing. I'm going to build it from the bottom up so that you understand how it works. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to insert a column. Right? I see there are people with their hands up. Okay, I see there's access again. Okay, the copy and paste, I see some people struggling with that. If you're going to copy and paste the formula, if you go to the formula, just make sure what you do is select the whole formula, right click and say copy. And then when you paste the formula, generally speaking, it's better to paste it in the formula box. So we are pasting things because you're using those curly brackets. We can use the top row of any sheet, because the first part of it is going to be my column header. So we go to A1, we click on that cell, and we go to the formula box, and we just paste the formula in there. Enter, and there I've got my auto row numbers sorted out. So you'll see again 1, 2, and 3. My pink row, just those of you who might have forgotten, remember that was my first row. It keeps on moving down because Google Sheets inserts rows. It doesn't go in and change things around. Now, something that's quite interesting, I can now move this one to the top if I wanted to. Sorry, I'm moving it to frozen panes, but I can move it around I can move it in here between these different ones. And what's going to happen is Google Forms will remember to continue writing after that entry. So it'll move it, it'll know where the last entry was, the last row that it wrote to, and it'll continue writing to that row. Just for interest's sake, if you ever get to the point where you need to use that. Right, now we want to create a column where we're essentially going to combine the surname and the name. There's different ways of doing it, but one of the easiest formulas imaginable is if you go to the formula here at the top and you go equals, click on the thing that you want to join, and then you use the AND key, and the next thing you want to join, and you'll end up with something that looks like that. Now, we're going to fix that in a second because that doesn't look great. But just to tell you this autofill thing, because anything wants to do the whole autofill, right? Autofill is a part of what these sheets tend to like to do, but we don't want this autofill to complete because we've actually got a formula that we're going to try and apply once off that's going to apply to the whole column. So reject this suggestion because we don't want it to happen. It's going to be in the way. Now, just to fix that part quickly, we actually need to insert something in here in between the Van Niekerk and the Jaco for it to work. And that's just going to be a comma to space it out. So all we want to do in order for that to work, we're going to add something in between. And we're going to just add a bit of text. So any text that you want to add, you're going to put between quotation marks. So this can be anything. So you can add a little dash there if you wanted to, and it'll look like that. But more common is you're going to use the comma and to put it over there, right? So there we've got Van Niekerk Jaco. Now I could go, as I said, and drag it down, but that's not going to work because the next bit that's going to be inserted, my formula is not going to copy down. So that's why we want to use our array formula. We're going to use that again. We'll enter array formula. Okay, so there's my array formula, and there's my little formula that I want to have copied down. But remember, if I'm going to enter this, it's not going to work because it's only applying it to, it's only going to actually apply it to the one part that I've selected. I need to specify a range for it. So in order to specify the range, we're going to say D2, and we're going to let it run all the way to the bottom of the sheet, to the end of column D. And we're going to say C2 all the way to the end of, we're going to run it all the way to the end of the sheet. Now you'll see it's great. I'm generating my names automatically using my array formula, but there's something else that's annoying that's also popping up, and that's this little comma that is appearing all the way down to the bottom. And we don't actually want that there. We want to make sure that that comma doesn't appear. So in order to get rid of that, remember what we used here at the beginning. We used our if function. So we tested if that is blank, then you do this, right? Sorry, it's in the way there. So we tested if there's any information that you've actually written in column B, then you're going to do this. If there's no information, then you will just give me a blank space. So we want to use that exact same thing. So we can just go and copy it. So we'll take that same bit, that if B2 to B is blank, and we're going to go and apply it over here with our array formula. Not there. We're going to add it over here inside our array formula. So let's just give ourselves a little bit more space so that everyone can see what's going on. Just want to space these things out a little bit. Right, so now we're going to say if. So there I've got my test. If there's any information that's been written in B, then you can run this part, this little thing, just so that you can understand that it's something that's run on its own. I'll just put it between brackets. You don't need to. It's not going to make any real difference to the thing at the end of the day. And then if there's nothing in column B, then add nothing. Enter, and there you see. Now I've removed my little comma. Right, I hope you're still keeping up. It is all still making sense. Right, now remember, the nice thing about doing today's session and Friday's session together is a lot of what we're doing on Friday is kind of going over these things again. So if you've got a basic understanding of how it works, then it's going to be a lot easier on Friday moving ahead with it. But if you still struggle with it on Friday, we're going to go through the whole array formula thing again. And all that I need to add here now to make sure that this thing actually looks and works the way that I want to is I want to add the curly brackets to the top. And after this, I'm going to explain to you what these, oh wait, we're not going to do that quite yet. Right, so we're going to add the curly brackets and we're going to give it a title. Our title is going to be combined or whatever you want to call it. And then a semicolon, that's an important thing. Don't write a comma, it's a semicolon. And then close your curly bracket again. It must close. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Let's just close it over there. So I'm just going to space it out a little bit better for you and give you a few moments to try and replicate this. Right, so there's the formula that we're trying to use. Now, just something about this. The minute that I press enter, it's not going to actually work correctly because what I'm doing is I'm actually trying to write it in the wrong row. So I need to take that whole formula, cut the formula, and put it in the top row. And there we go. So that is the formula that we're trying to create. I'm going to give you a minute to try and just copy or, well, to recreate that. That's not on the formula cheat sheet. And then I'll explain it again. I see Eunice, if you've got a question, please write it in the chat. And then I can try and help you with that.
I'm just going to quickly address two questions. There was a few that requested some info on a ref. So I just want to make sure that you did cover that. I know that when you copy it, you must make sure it's in the formula bar. But is there another reason maybe for a ref?
Right. So let me explain why that happens.
Jaco, you are muted. Sorry, man.
Sorry. Right. Just this is a nice place to explain what the ref thing actually does and how it works. And I'll explain why it does that with the copying in a minute as well. But what the ref does is what the reference error means is it's trying to write information somewhere and it's finding that there's something in the way, right? So there's something in the way where it's trying to write. Now, let's take this as an example. And I look at this combination and I say, but wait, that van Niekerk should be a capital V. So the minute I do that, it's going to break the whole formula. Because now it is, as you can see, it can't write anything because it finds that there's information in E2. And that's why you're getting a ref error. It's trying to write information, but it can't write the information. So I need to make sure that if I've got my formula at the top, I need to clear space for it. Select everything else and delete it. And then it's got space to write the information. So if you copy it, if you just simply copy the formula, what happens sometimes, and let's see, I hope mine's going to do that now. If I copy the formula and I go and paste it, right, there we go. So it could end up doing this because now it's pasting the formula across multiple lines, and that's obviously not going to work. So we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're pasting it in the formula bar. And if it's still giving you an error, it's probably because you've got something in the way. So there's some formula that's still running. You might have done this part that for example, that we did. +1, oh sorry, -1. You might have done that. So there I've got my auto row numbering, but my formula is trying to write there and it can't. So that's why you're getting that ref error. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to look at how do I actually go and link multiple Google Forms to one. How do I link multiple Google Forms to one Google Sheet? So in order to do that, we're going to create a duplicate of our Google form that we already have. Right, so we're going to click here, go back to your Google form. And on your Google form, let me just go here quickly again. The combined formula, there we go. There is the combined formula. So just to explain exactly what's going on here, bit by bit. So the first line that you see there, that first line is just the header. It generates the row header for me, the one that creates the combined thing. Then I've got a formula over here, this part. That is where I'm combining two different columns to one another. So what it does essentially is it's going to take any value in D2, it's going to insert a comma, and then it's going to take the value in C2 and create that as a combination. Then it'll do the same thing for D3, comma, C3, D4, comma, C4, etc., etc. But because we don't want that little comma to generate if it's actually a blank row, that's why what we've done is we've added this if part. So the if formula, what the if formula does is it first checks, is there anything in column B? And it runs this from B2 all the way to the bottom. So it first checks, is there something in column B? If there is something in column B, then it will run this formula. If there's nothing in column B, it'll just insert blank. It won't actually write anything. Then we wrap all of that in an array formula because we want it to automatically run this. We want essentially this little formula over here. We want that to run all the way to the bottom. Okay, and then we've got this at the top, which just gives us our column header. Right, so now we want to write multiple Google Forms to one Google Sheet. So here's our Google Form again, and we're going to make a copy of this Google Form. So in order to make a copy, you just click on the More options there, and you say Make a Copy. Right, so we'll make a copy. You can call it whatever you want to call it. You can save it wherever you want to save it. Remember what I said in the beginning, try and keep things a little bit neat and organized. It just makes your life easier moving forward. So we're just going to say OK. And there I've got now a copy of Google Sheets Masterclass. When you start seeing that, you need to realize that your thing is becoming a bit messy now. And what we're doing in this instance is we're actually going to have a different Google form, one
Oh, it seems like we've lost Jaco. The sound just went away. Maybe he was kicked out of Teams. That could happen. While I've got the floor, I'll quickly have 2 seconds of your time. It's Anita speaking. Maybe I must just put on my screen so you can see I'm not a robot. Good day, everybody. So yes, maybe I can just quickly have 2 seconds of your time while Jaco comes back. Can you hear me at least? I think so. All right. So basically, I see that there's a lot of people asking about resources. Can we share within the resources? So basically, please, we do not share our email addresses here, and we will not collect email addresses here to share with you resources. We have a process, and the process is for you to register in this session, and then we get your information, and we do distribute some resources at the beginning of September for all of the participants. All right. Okay, Jaco's back. There you go.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. It seems Teams has decided to get a little buggy on us recently. I hope they fix it. But anyway, so here we are again. There's my form, still the same form, still everything's the same. Right, now, all that I want to do now, sorry, Janine, if you don't mind just posting the question in the chat. Can I just get a thumbs up if everyone's hearing and seeing everything again? All right, great. Anyway, strange little bug there. Okay, so once I've got my second Google form, now remember, here I've got copy of Google form and here I've got copy of my Google Sheets Masterclass form. Again, give them proper names, otherwise you're going to get very confused here. So what we want to do is we're going to link this Google form in the same way that we linked the first one. The only difference is we're going to click on responses. And when you click here on the create spreadsheet, you're not going to go and create a new spreadsheet. We want to say select existing spreadsheet, right? So I'm going to click select existing spreadsheet, and it'll open up this dialog where I need to select the spreadsheet that I want to use. Now, as you can see here, these are all spreadsheets that everything that you see over there are spreadsheets that I'm part of that have had some kind of things happening in the past in the past hour or since we created our original spreadsheet, and just to kind of show you that I really do practice what I preach today. So we want to go to the spreadsheet that we created. If you can't find it, you can just type the name of the spreadsheet here and it'll find that spreadsheet for you. So I'm going to select that example that I've got, and what happens now is you'll see I've got form responses 1 and I've got form responses 2. So I've got the two set up, two of them open on one. Both these forms are writing their content into one Google Sheet, which is great because now it becomes easy for me to essentially have two different forms and in a way combine the content. Right, so now what we're going to do, now the next thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that these two forms look exactly the same. But before we do that, we have to have some kind of distinction between these forms other than just having it called form responses 1 and form responses 2. So what we want to do is we want to add another column. Right, we're going to add another column next to the class column. So this is going to be between the class and the teacher column. I'll add one. And I'm going to call, this is going to be my grade column. Just want to see if we can make things easy for you. So there is you can copy this formula from the cheat sheet. That'll just automatically generate this grade for you. So let's just copy that. We're just going to be a little bit lazy and rush this thing, not rush this thing, move this along a little bit quicker. Right, so now we're just going to quickly paste it over here. See, now I've done exactly that thing that I told you not to do. We want to paste it here in the formula bar, and it's automatically going to go and determine. I see there's a couple of interesting questions that I'm going to get to in a second. But what this formula does, and by now I hope it starts making a little bit more sense. Let's just take some of these spaces away so it's a bit easier to read. We've got the top bit that is going to be our column header. Then we've got this array formula that just tells me that whatever is wrapped in this array formula is going to be applied across multiple rows. And then I'm running this test. If there's any information in column B, you should by now be getting used to this little line. If there's any information in column B, then write grade 1. If there's no information in column B, then just write a blank. So in that way, I'm automatically generating this extra column, grade 1 column. Right, now what I'm just going to do quickly, I'm just going to show you the problem that we have now is we want to be able to combine these. That's where we're going next, is combining the information from form responses 1 and form responses 2. So, and I'll give you a few minutes to do that while I'm just going to answer one or two of the questions here in the side. What I want you to try and do now is make sure that everything that you see, all of these, let me just quickly highlight them in a way. Make them blue. So these blue columns, just going to zoom out a little bit. These blue columns are ones that are generated automatically using formulas. So I've got the row numbers. That one's not so important, but it's still a useful thing to do. This is an important column, and this is an important column. Try and make sure that on form responses 2, you have the same, you've got the exact same columns inserted, right? So we're going to have one inserted in front of the timestamp. We're going to have one between, we're going to have one after the learner's surname. That's going to be our combination one. And we're going to have one, just make sure that your teacher and your class ones are correct. I see I forgot mine. And we're going to have that. So essentially what you're looking at is you need to make sure that your column headers in form responses 1 and form responses 2 are exactly the same. So just give me a thumbs up once you've got that sorted, and then right, and then we'll get to we'll get to the next step. So Dion, in terms of how I copied the sheet, remember I didn't copy the sheet. What I actually did is I just made a copy of the Google form. So on the Google form, you just click on the 3 dots. I'll just go to form responses 1 just to highlight what it should look like on your end. But I went to the Google form and I just copied made a copy of the Google form. Then when I linked the Google form to the Google sheet, rather than create a new Google sheet, I actually just made sure that I link it to an existing one. Yes, Fani, that is the next step. We are getting to the curly bracket in a second. And then it'll hopefully start making a little bit more sense, because the curly bracket can be very confusing as well, I know. Then what Tanya's asking, right, so having an individual form per learner, I mean, it is possible. I don't recommend doing that, because ultimately what you want to do is we're getting to the point where everything needs to be thrown into one data set. So even the way we're doing it now, technically, I wouldn't have multiple forms for multiple grades. I would just have one question where I can select the grade that I'm completing this form for, because then I can actually skip this whole combination step. That's just for the training purposes that we want to look at how we can do that. So I wouldn't have a form for every learner. And ultimately, at the end of the session, I'm just going to show you kind of where we are going, where we are heading towards, although we won't get there after these 2 sessions, but we'll get a lot closer to that, which is essentially getting into exactly what you are referring to. Right. Yes, I'm glad someone's pointing to VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP is what we're going to be doing, really focusing on on Friday's session, to kind of reimagine what we're doing here, because yes, VLOOKUP is an essential part of how we want to get all of this pulled together. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Right, so we want to make sure that our form responses 1 and form responses 2 look the same. Now I want to show you another very useful little thing that people aren't always aware of. I want to input some dummy information into form responses 2 so that I just have something to look at and something to work with. So if you've got lots of forms that are writing into one Google Sheet and you get a little bit confused, where are they? You know where your sheet, where you can find your sheet, you've got that saved, bookmarked, or whatever it is that you're doing, but you don't know how to get to your forms. A useful little trick to get there, if you've opened it up the sheet, you'll see there's an extra tab here at the top. It doesn't appear if there are no forms linked to the sheet, but if there are forms linked to the sheet, that will appear. Form, which allows you to go to send form, edit form, go to live form, etc., etc. Now, what we actually just want to do is we just want to go to the live form so that we can just input some dummy information. So I'm just going to go and input some information in here. And we'll just use me as again, class C, next. Late. He was very late. I'm just going to add one entry so that we've just got something to work with. So there we go. I've got my information. Everything is there. I've got my blank columns as well, and they at the moment are not doing anything. So this is another reason why it is actually very nice to add your formulas in the top row, because now what I can do is I can simply go and select that, copy it, go to form responses 2 and paste it, and it'll just work. Same thing here, go to the combined, copy it, form responses 2 and paste it, and there we go. There it is working. Go to the grade 1, copy it, go to the form responses, paste it, and again it's working. Now remember, we want to change this one because this is the one that we're using for our grade 2s. So we're just going to change that to grade 2 so that what we're actually doing is everything that's going to be inserted with a first form is automatically we're going to automatically pick up that it's grade 1 learners, and everything with a second form will automatically show that it is coming from the second form. Right. Just want to see, there was an interesting question here. Right, so Lester Bomberg is asking an interesting question here about how do you add scores in different Google form quizzes together on one Excel sheet? Well, you can link your multiple Google quizzes to one sheet. That's an easy, we just looked at how you do that. The tricky part is going to be making sure that there needs to be some, and we'll look at that, I think, in Friday's session. There must be somewhere that you can match the learners from one sheet to the next sheet. And that's where often we end up, if we don't control that part of it, it's very hard to match these scores. If you do control that part of it, it's actually quite easy to match the scores using different little tricks to do that. We'll kind of get you to the bones of how to do that. Yes, using ID keys, that's kind of the key thing that we need to do here. Right, so but we're running ahead of ourselves here. So here I've got form responses 1, I've got form responses 2. Now what I want to show you when we want to combine these two, let's look at what the curly brackets actually do. Because understanding curly brackets is a very, very, very useful thing. So the first, just to understand what they do, curly brackets create something called an array. And that's just a fancy word for, and if there's someone else who knows what arrays mean, please forgive me if I describe it this way. This is the easiest way to understand it for me, is it's just a group of formula, or not formulas, a group of values that we're using. So in a way, to show you how this works, if I'm using curly brackets, so let's say I've got these numbers 1, 2, 3, 4. Enter, it's just going to give me an error because that makes no sense to Google Sheets. This is not a formula that I'm using. I can put it in quotation marks, and then I transform it into text, and it's just going to write it like that. But what if I want this to write across multiple rows or multiple columns? That's where the curly brackets come in. So if I add curly brackets, what the curly brackets will do is it will now see this as that's one value, that's one value, that's one value, and that's one value. And the comma tells it, please write this information across multiple rows. So in other words, I can do that, and suddenly my information is printed in this way. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm actually doing is I'm telling it write it across rows. Now the reason why we use the semicolon, columns, the semicolon does the opposite. The semicolon tells it write all of these values in multiple rows. So I'm going to say enter, and it will do that. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, something that makes this very useful is I can actually use curly brackets and select ranges. So there I've got my curly brackets. Let's just select a random little range. We're going to take that. So I want to say select form responses from B1 to C4, enter, and it'll take the whole range. So I don't have to go equals this, equals this, equals this, equals this. I can select ranges. Now the same thing happens here with that whole ref error. If I want to go 4, 5, 6, I'm going to get a reference error because I'm trying to, what Google Sheets is trying to do is it wants to write information in that space, but that is now in our way. So this becomes a problem. We want to take it away, and now it can write that. And this becomes one of the key ways in how we combine information from multiple sheets. Because what we can do technically now is we can go and select one long range. And this is something else I want to point out quickly before we get to that you need to understand. If you're going to select multiple columns, the range that you select can have any kind of length of rows, but it must have the same number of columns. So another way of looking at that, let me just take this away to explain this quickly. Let's say we take A, B, C. So what's going to happen now is A, B, C. Sorry, let's take 1, 2, 3. It's easier that way around. 1, 2, 3. So if I've got 1, 2, 3 with commas, it'll print in the first 3 columns. But let's say I want to have a second row. If I want to do that, it's going to tell me there's an error because I must make sure that there are 3 columns. The second set has to be 3 columns as well. So I can make this 4, 5, 6, and now it will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the columns have to match. And that's something that sometimes we try and create these. The reason why I say that is I've often seen that when we try and create these formulas, we run into an error. We're not sure why we're getting that error. But that's quite a common one that I've picked up, that your different sets of information you're trying to combine, the columns don't match. So we're actually just going to go and match these columns, make sure that we can combine them. So the easiest thing to do, we'll open up our curly bracket, and this is now when we're going to combine these things. I'm going to give you a second to do that. I think there's a formula in the cheat sheet that does that as well, but we'll get to that in a second. So I've opened up my curly bracket, and I simply click on the part that I'm going to select. I don't want to select the header because I'm only interested in the data, and I also am not going to select the automatic row numbering because it's not going to make sense to take the row numbers with me. Remember, when I'm selecting this information, I'm not selecting the formulas, I'm selecting the actual information that is being written there. So we'll click there and we'll drag it all the way to the end, but make sure that you include 1 extra row. The reason why I say that, you can't stop at 4, you have to go to 5, because every time Google Forms is going to write a new row, it's going to insert a row and will print information to that. So if I specify read everything from row 2 to row 5, when there's a new row inserted, that formula is going to automatically change from row 2 to 6, and it will include the new information that has been added. I hope that makes sense. So I'll just say enter, and they've got my first bit of information. I don't actually want that to happen in A2. I want that to happen in B2. Now, be careful, because this is another trick another thing that often goes wrong. If I simply copy that formula, pay careful attention, we've got B2 to J2. If I copy that formula and I go and paste it there, the formula is actually going to change from C3 to K6. Because when I copy formulas in this way, it copies relative formulas and it changes it the way that it thinks it's supposed to change it. In this instance, that's not what I want. I want that formula to move there. Now, when I want that to happen, I go and I copy the formula in the formula tab. I go to where I want it to be and I go and paste it in the formula tab. And then I know I've copied the formula, correctly, and take that away. Right, I hope everyone's still with me. Now I need my column, I need my row headers. Very easy to go and get them. We'll just go to any one of these things. And what's important now is when I copy them, I'm just going to leave that one for a second. When I go and I copy these don't just copy and paste them, because remember, if you copy and paste them, you're going to copy the formulas that are in them as well, and we don't want to copy those formulas. So we'll copy that row, copy this, go to sheet 2, which is the one that we're using now, and rather than just going paste, right-click and say paste special values only. So there we go. Now I've only actually pasted the values, and I've not added the actual formulas. Because remember, if I'm going to add this class formula, or this grade formula, for example, it's going to want to try and apply the grade formula, but there's stuff in the way because I've already done this grade formula. All right. And the one formula that I do want to copy, I'm just going to go get my row numbers, because it's such an easy little formula to just copy and move anywhere that you want to. It really is a formula that I've almost got it on standby whenever I'm building a new thing, just to go and copy that row formula if ever I need it for that thing. But now, this is not what we actually wanted, because all that we've done is we've basically made a copy of this form responses 1. And that's not what we want. We want form responses 2 as well. So now we go back to our curly brackets, because now we're going to use the semicolon, and we're going to give it a second range to go and collect. We're going to go to form responses 2, and we'll take the same range all the way to, and now it's not going to show me to, no, let's just do it like this. Right, please note you can obviously do it all the way to the bottom of the column, but I'm going to show you why I don't recommend doing that. Let's just do it. I'm just going to leave it at that. I just recommend that you don't do that, because if I'm going to copy it all the way to the bottom, I'm going to take a whole bunch of blank spaces with me to sheet 2 that I really don't need. Remember, we want the values that we have already plus 1 row, because now that is going to expand. So I've got that, and there we go. We've got our 2 sets of information that has been joined. And I'm just going to stop there for a second and give you a minute or two to try and catch up to this. Just give me a thumbs up if you've gotten to this point. Right, just to, while you're trying to get to this point, just to elaborate on what Anita is pointing out, it's exactly the idea of what we're trying to do. We're trying to look at how do I use Google Forms to collect information, and then you can use multiple Google Forms to collect information, and how do we put it all together to create one big data set? And that one big data set can then be used to in a number of different ways. For example, the session that you're going to have on Data Studio, which is next week, where we look at how I can actually do great things using that data to track things. So for example, what we're building here is this learner discipline system, and using this, what I've shown you now, together with what we can do in Data Studio, you can actually build a system that is practically useful in your school to check learner, to go and identify individual learners and track their disciplinary record, etc., etc. Obviously, it takes a while to wrap your head around all of it, but these really are essentially the building blocks of what you need to do something like that, to make a practically workable system in your school. Right, so there's one very annoying thing, and that's pretty much the last thing we want to look at today. I just want to double check if we covered everything. Yes, that we actually managed to get to the end of everything that we wanted to do today. And then I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preview of where we are building with this thing. Not that we will get to all of that necessarily on Friday, but where we are going with this and what it potentially can do. So there's one big problem here, and that is this gap in there because we don't want that gap. We don't want every time that we want to combine information end up having a gap. And then something else that people have pointed out is I used to be an English teacher, so things that are this unorganized really just frustrates and annoys me. I want things to be sorted alphabetically. That's just the way that my head works. So we want to sort this in some way. So in order to do that, there's another useful function that we can use, and I think this is also something that once you start looking at this, that could maybe let some light bulbs go on as well about the potential of some of the things you could do. So I'm going to use a function called, not surprisingly, sort. Now, if I just run sort like this without any parameters, so I literally take the array that I've created, this thing that has been created with the curly brackets, and I just wrap it in a sort function. So by typing sort in the beginning, bracket, bracket, and enter, it'll take my thing away. Because what it does when I say sort, it actually sorts all of the information based on the first column by default. If I don't give it any kind of parameters, it'll sort it according to the first column. So the first column in this instance is going to be the timestamp, which, if we're going to be honest, is probably the best kind of thing to use to sort it. Just something never mind, I'm not going to confuse with that. Right, but maybe that's not how we want to sort our information. Maybe we would prefer to use an alphabetical kind of sorting. So now, rather than doing that, we're going to go sort, and I'm going to add a comma, and now I choose the column that should be used as the sorting column. But I can't enter A, B, C, or D. I have to enter a relative number for that. So in this instance, this is column, because I'm selecting information from column B to column J, and I'm also adding it here, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So let's say, for argument's sake, I want to sort it according to the class column. So then I'm going to go, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my class column. I'll tell it, say 5. And then the next part that you have to say is either true or false. True means that it's going to sort it in ascending, and false means it's going to be sorted in descending. So let's just try that and see what happens. Enter, and you'll see now it's using column 5. Well, in this instance, remember, just so that you understand this, because this can be a little bit confusing. If I look at this, technically you could say, but look, that's column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So class is supposed to be column 6. Why on earth is it now suddenly column 5? Because I'm running the sort on this set, this data, well, this range, and in this range, column A is not column 1, column B is column 1. So that's, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, with this little trick, you can really sort your stuff very, very nicely. I'll go through the sorting again in a second. But let's say we're going to sort it first according to, we'll sort it according to class, and you can have multiple sorts. They work in little pairs. So 5 and true, and let's just say we're going to sort it according to that one as well, and we'll sort it according to true. Okay, so let's try and understand and wrap our heads around what is going on here. What is it that I'm doing? All the different parts of this. I'm just, again, you don't have to space it out the way that I'm spacing it out. I'm just doing this for the training purposes. And if I'm going to be honest, since I've been doing this now for training, I've actually been doing it when I build forms as well, because it's easier for me to see what is actually going on. Right, so let's check what's happening with each of these different parts of this formula. This part of the formula is the part that I'm actually taking the cell contents, the information from one of my tabs here at the bottom and a second one, and I'm combining it. So I'm taking this, everything that is actually written into B2 to J5. I take that information and then I add the semicolon. I hope everyone understood the whole semicolon part. And I combine it with the information I've got in form responses 2. So here I'm combining all of that with using that formula, and I'm using the curly brackets because the curly brackets allows me to select multiple cells and not only one cell at a time. So I'm selecting cells across a long part. With this, I'm creating a new range. Then that range I put into this sort function. So the sort function looks for any kind of range that I've got. And now I've got these two, these things over here. They act in pairs. Maybe we should just quickly move that over there. Hope this is going to make it look a little bit more. And we'll move. Sorry. It just wrapped it like that again for me, but it's okay. Then these two pairs that I've got over here, when I use the sort function, I don't have to have anything. If I've got nothing there, what's going to happen is it will take the first column. So in this instance, it'll take the timestamp and it'll sort my information according to the timestamp, which is a useful thing to do. But if I want to sort it according to a different column, I can select a different column. So I can now, let's say we're going to select column 2, which is my learner name column. It has to happen in pairs because if I write true there, the true tells it that it's sorting it ascending. So from A to Z. And then I can add a second one and we can say that now we're going to sort column 3 and we're going to make that false. So now it's sorting from the bottom, from Z to A. And I'll say enter. And now I've got something that's sorted in a very weird way because I'm first sorting according to name and then I'm sorting according to surname, and it just ends up being a little bit strange, which is not really what we want. And we realize, but I actually want to have it sorted first according to column 5, true, true, and then again, and then 4, true, and then I've got something sorted in a way that makes a little bit more sense. First according to classes, and then I'm sorting it according to the names of the people in those classes. Right, and we're going to stop there with the sort function because it is 4:30. That's where we are going to stop with everything. On Friday, and then I'm very glad that a number of people have mentioned this, because if you remember, the very first thing we really started off with is we started with the first question was this unique identifier thing. Now remember, I didn't actually do that. So what's happened here is I was pretty accurate. I've got 3 of them nice and the same, but here my caps lock key went a little bit haywire. So suddenly the school has now 2 teachers called Mr. van Niekerk. And this is a problem. I need to control this. I also know that my colleague Harriet, her surname is spelled incorrectly. So I spelled the surname incorrectly because I'm not using a list or an ID key or something. So that's on Friday. We're really going to look at how do we control the data input? How do we make sure that we keep things nice and organized so that it's easier for us to really see how we can manage the information. Now, what I want to show you very, very briefly, I just want to open this up quickly so that I can show you kind of where we are building towards. And on Friday, we'll get pretty close to this point. Hopefully, maybe we can move nice and quickly on Friday, because I think this group was able to move quite quickly to where we are now. And I'll show you exactly what some of you were asking. There's different ways of doing this, of course, but just to show you this, what you see in front of you is exactly the thing that you were talking about, trying to have information categorized per learner. And as I said, we're actually not that far away from this point. So here I've got a drop down, I select the learner's name, and it gives me a summary of their of what's happening here. Obviously, these are all examples, so it's not a very detailed thing. Here I've also generated this little summary where I can start tracking the kind of things about that I need to pick up on these learners. We've got some formatting and things applied, etc., etc. So this is just kind of a quick look at where we are, what you can do with this, and really, we've really looked at a lot of the building blocks of what we are moving towards. So it's really, once you wrap your head around how the form works and how the sheet works and that array formula thing, then you're halfway towards building these kinds of tools. Now, the key thing that's still coming on Friday, that is an essential part of it, is the ID key that many of you have mentioned, and using VLOOKUP and things like that to generate these things in the end. Right, so with that said, thank you everyone. I really hope that you've learned a lot in this session. We are starting with a process here of, again, this transformative kind of way that we want to look at it, changing the system. And what's most exciting about all of these things that I've always found so exciting about it is in using Google Sheets and Forms, you essentially have access to a free cloud-based database software. And then once you bring in Data Studio, you'll see how exciting it really can get with some of the things that you can build yourself, and you don't have to go and spend a ton of money on, and you can customize it the way that is going to really work for your school. And just to show you though that if we look at these form responses, it kind of looks like the stuff that we did today already, and that's the building blocks of, these are the building blocks of our whole system that I just showed you.
Oh, Jaco, you are on mute again. I don't know why, but maybe we can just wrap up nearly. I know we are a bit over time now, so maybe if we can just quickly show the presentation end again, if you are there yet.
Yes, I'll just open that very quickly. Okay,
well,
sorry, I apologize.
Sorry, go on.
Yes, I know we're a little bit over time. So let's just quickly wrap up where we are now. So essentially, this part I think is one of the fundamental things where we often get stuck a little bit is we build forms, we design forms, we collect information, but we don't really know what to do with it. And I hope today's session at least showed you that there's something you can do with it. You can really start doing great stuff with it once you get it into Google Sheets. And just be careful the minute that you download that Google Sheet into Excel, because not everyone, but a lot of people are more comfortable and familiar with Excel. It's not linked to your form anymore. So just be mindful of that. Then we looked at the manipulating form responses, how we can combine cell contents, the if function, such an important thing to use. The array formula, we didn't use the if error function because we didn't have a use for it today, but we are going to look at that on Friday. And then a really useful one, combining two form responses and importing across sheets and ranges. So the import range function is another one that we are keeping back for Friday. We'll show you how that works. And really, once you start seeing what this can do, import range, I really think this starts opening up a whole world of possibilities of the things you can do in Google Sheets and the tools you can build. So a very, very useful thing that we will be looking at. So the key thing, I hope you know a little bit or understand how Google Forms and Google Sheets integrates. We looked at that is an important part. Adding columns, moving columns, how does it write two rows? What does it actually do? That's a key thing that you need to understand. So I hope that makes sense now. Then just remember, there are two tracks to this whole spreadsheet series. I know there were one or two people that said they actually were here for track 1 and you ended up being in track 2. I'm very sorry for that. I hope you still found this interesting and useful, but track 2 is very much, it's called Masterclass for a reason, because we hope that you come on with a decent baseline already, so that we can just use that to springboard into the more interesting, complicated things that you can do. Not saying that track 1 is not important, because you have to understand track 1 if you want to get to track 2, and that is really understanding the basic functionality of spreadsheets, what cells are, columns, etc. So if you really found yourself lost today, I recommend making sure that you just get yourself clued up with the basic workings of spreadsheet software, Excel sheets or Google Excel or Google Sheets, and then obviously these other parts are quite useful. Data visualization, I must say, that's the one part of Google Sheets I'm not a big fan of. It struggles a little bit with that, but then it makes up for that by having Data Studio, which is an amazing tool. Right, so today we did the form and sheet integration. On Friday, we'll do the data manipulation automation. So that's when we get a little bit more complicated, using VLOOKUP and import ranges and all sorts of fun things like that. And then Data Studio is going to be next week. I'm not sure which days, Anita. I forgot now.
Thursday, I think.
Thursday, right. So next week, Thursday, is the Masterclass 3, the Data Studio session. Very, very cool session. I've also been in that session. Really interesting session. And yes, remember, practice makes perfect. These are not things that I learned in 1 hour-and-a-half session. These are things that I've picked up over a long time, and things that I use all the time, so I know them quite well. And the only way to get to learn how they work is to actually find a use for them. Someone mentioned that question of how do I combine multiple Google Forms quiz results and get them into one place. Very useful way that you can use what we are doing at the moment. But you're going to have to remember the ID key thing, which we will look at on Friday, in order to be able to match these things. But it's something that I always did when I was still teaching. Just combining these things works wonderfully well. Please make sure you've signed the attendance register, and make sure that you are registered for Friday if you haven't done so yet. As Anita has pointed out, the pre-registration closes at the end of the day.
Tomorrow morning at 8. Tomorrow morning.
Closes tomorrow morning at 8. So don't wait for tomorrow. Register now, and then on Friday we'll take this a few steps further. So thank you very much. We'll be around for a few more, I would like to say, over seconds. If there are questions, please use the chat to ask those questions. Anita and myself, we will hang around a little bit to see if we can answer some questions.
So people are asking where's the register. I'm not sure which register. We have a pre-registration, then we've got an in-session registration for attendance. So I will be sharing the in-session registration for attendance, but the pre-register for the sessions was distributed via minute. You can just look for your 0005 dial minute.
Fani, I'm not 100% sure. Remember, there was one Google form sent out where you could pre-register for any of the sessions. So if you pre-registered for this one, I hope you registered for the other one. If you're not sure, just make sure that you register again, just to double check that you are. And yes, that in-session registration, please don't fill it in multiple times. Otherwise, we just have to go and clean up the fact that you've captured more than one. So only fill in that in-session, and that applies to all e-learning sessions, please.
So if there's any questions, we are really going to be here for a few more minutes, and then we're going to conclude this session, and then we will see you guys again on Friday where this continues. Those that want to participate in track 1, still remember that is tomorrow, still running session 2. Thank you, Jaco, for an excellent session. I appreciate your dedication, and we will wait for 1 or 2 more minutes, and then